Welcome on in, everybody. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast for Super Wildcard Weekend. Do they still call it that? Maybe it's just Wildcard Weekend. We've come to our senses, but in our hearts, it is Super Wildcard Weekend. We got 3 days of NFL playoff action to get the postseason rolling. I'm your host, John McKechnie. That is Mario Puig. On today's episode, we are going to give our usual treatment to these games, maybe a little bit more in depth than when we were able to do when we got 16 games to talk about. So we'll roll through all 6 games, and then at the end, touch on a little bit of playoff fantasy strategy. If you're playing best ball, if you're in any leagues with your pals that are progressive, go throughout the entirety of the playoffs. We'll give a few rules of thumb to bear in mind as you do those. Lock those in over the next couple of days. But Mario, why don't we start things out in the customary Houston Texans when they're in the playoffs slot, the Saturday afternoon game. We've got the Texans playing host to the Chargers. The Chargers road favorites in this one, 2.5-point favorites. The over-under set at 42.5. And I think I am like a lot of people where I don't think the Texans are going to win. But I'm also reminding myself that last year in this pretty much exact same setup, everybody loved the Browns. Everybody loved the Browns against the Texans in that wild card game. I looked it up this morning. Like 80% of the handle was on the Browns minus 2.5 last year. And the Texans, and obviously there was a little bit of recent history between the two. Amari Cooper had that incredible game against the Texans in week 16, week 17, something like that. So there was something recent to draw on to make you think, okay, Texans have had a very good season, but the Browns are just red hot right now. It's going to be Cleveland, but obviously things went the complete opposite way, and the Texans, kind of boat raced the Browns. But in this particular setup, how do you view this game shaking out?
Well, the betting situation is what it is, and the public betting the way they are on the Chargers to cover and the line staying what it is, it leads to a point where either Vegas eats a big loss, or the people who are still betting on the Chargers to cover are the ones who are going to be eating something. And it's like it could go either way. Obviously, Vegas doesn't win every single time, but they tend to not lose just the same. So I guess as someone who kind of wants the Chargers to win, and not because I dislike the Texans, I do like the Texans. I just think they're kind of like a hopeless team. I think even if the Texans win this game, they're just going in limping to the second round and they're just out. Whereas the Chargers obviously are not a juggernaut team, but I think they have a way of being able to beat anybody any given day. And just the same, the Chargers do have some limitations, obviously. Like, they can't score quickly. They can't score often for a long stretch of time. Even the defense, as good as it is, it's gotten its results by overachieving rather than being truly great or anything. But I think the danger here for the Chargers, and the way that maybe there is maybe a way they can kind of win and still just not cover, even with it only being 2.5 points. And it's like a byproduct of how close they tend to keep games anyway. It's like the Chargers don't really tend in their winning weeks to just race out to a big lead. They tend to kind of make the game short and make little details matter more than most other games, which they tend to turn to their advantage. That there's a reason they try to set it up that way. And just the same, it's like the Texans are a team who I would have easily picked to win this game if they were healthy, if they were the team that they were kind of supposed to be this year. And if I guess if there's something that they can tap into as far as with the potential they always had, if they can kind of just find some of it here, which through Nico Collins, definitely. I don't think those Chargers corners, as good as they've been playing, can stop Nico. But the problem for the Texans in most games this year, even when they've had Nico Collins, is they can't really get much more else going, even if Mixon gets something going, which the Chargers tend to play the run pretty well. I don't know why this would be one of Mixon's better setups. But even if they get Mixon going, and even if Collins gets going, who's the third person from scrimmage who contributes for the Texans? I don't really see that player. So I think the Texans need to keep it a low-scoring game, and so like the way the Chargers are inclined to play, I think the Texans are okay with going along with that because they need that style of play anyway here. Like the Texans can't get in a shootout. So if the Chargers are, obsessed about avoiding shootouts, that's just fine with the Texans. But I still take the Chargers to win, even if they're not going to cover, just because I feel like the Chargers are the team they were supposed to be. Like the Chargers were planning on being this team, playing the game the way they do with the kind of players that they have all along. Whereas the Texans are kind of just trying to, keep a sinking ship afloat best as they can. And I don't doubt that they're going to come in locked in. And I still think D'Amico Ryans is great. Bobby Slowick, I don't know. Maybe he still might be okay. But D'Amico Ryans, I think, is very good and is almost like among the new wave of coaches. It's like Ryans is one of those guys who's close to that Harbaugh style of football. So I think the Texans are prepared to play that style of football. It's just, if nothing else, I'm banking on Herbert being better than Stroud. And as far as last year's scenario, the tone was very different. The spread was the same, but the Texans were viewed as a team that was a pleasant surprise and doing great.
Yes.
It simply wasn't like we were like, it's not their moment yet, but the Browns are more polished. The Browns, they have veterans. They're going to probably eke it out or whatever. And then the Texans just showed like, no, we are a playoff style group of players when we have the talent. And they did last year. I just don't know if they do this year.
Right. It's just, I think that that last point on like the tenor of the Texans, it is so drastically different. Like the Texans were, a trendy team to make it to at least the AFC Championship coming into this year. They were a team that, you have your guy of the future in CJ Stroud. You have Nico Collins. You bring in Joe Mixon. You add Stephon Diggs to that mix. You hope that, Tank Dell can, after his offseason, come back and be the player that he was during his rookie campaign. And just things just didn't really work out for the Texans. And I think that maybe we're collectively grading the Texans a little bit too harshly for the way that this season went. Maybe we can admit that like a lot of injuries, and I think we all kind of got over our skis with just how big of a leap you can take in year two. I mean, progress is not linear, not in this league. So in hindsight, I guess it's easier to say, but like this is a Texans team that, okay, it didn't work out this year. It doesn't mean that it can't work next year and beyond. I still, I'm very in on CJ Stroud. It just,
me too.
It's been a tough year for them. So I think that just the Chargers are playing a better brand of ball at the moment. And I think having Dobbins back is nice. And
I will say, I think the challenge or the danger here for the Chargers is that their default style of play of like 2-3 tight ends, big formations, not many defensive backs on the field by the defense responding, that suits the Texans because what the Texans lack is cornerback depth. But I do think and this is a big if Greg Roman's not a total idiot and if Jim Harbaugh isn't like keeping an eye on him in the event that he is one, the Chargers should be able to do like a novel game plan here where they go a little more 3 receiver than they normally would, specifically to get that nickel corner on the field for the Texans. And it's almost always a safety. It's Jalen Petrie. I don't know if he's still hurt, but when it's not Petrie, it's like Jimmy Ward and they got Kalen Bullock, Eric Murray, these guys who are all corner safety tweeners. But if the Chargers go 3 wide and get McConkey against Petrie or Jimmy Ward or Eric Murray, that's where the Chargers can do some quick or big damage. But if they try to do this 2 tight end stuff, that kind of plays to the strengths of the Houston defense.
This will kind of more dovetail with the last segment of the show. But as far as like last round of your playoff draft darts are concerned, if you are kind of expecting the Chargers to play at least 2 games, what do you think about Darius Davis?
Well,
you kind of need one of those guys.
He's made good plays lately, and to Darius Davis' credit, plays that the Chargers kind of needed him to make. but I still think there's no evidence at all that it scales up. I think it's like he at once, Darius Davis at once can get full credit for making those plays, and it can still be kind of like an understood and accepted reality that a guy with his trait profile can only give you so many shots like that. And especially the like the end around kind of stuff, the more you do that, the more defenses sit on it. Like it if you're blindsiding a defense with it, it can put them in a blender. But when they're sitting on it, when they're not misreading cues because they're specifically reading the cues differently because they're looking for the play, then Davis can turn into nothing as an end around threat. And while he's made really good route running plays lately, it would be unprecedented for him if he were to keep it up. It happens sometimes, right. But it's a narrow path probability wise, but he is actually fast. He is actually obviously extremely elusive with the football. So if he can kind of bridge that disconnect between, how good he is with the ball versus how unable throughout his career his offenses have been to get him the ball consistently. If the consistency changes and he gets the ball regularly, Davis could be pretty dangerous. It's just, even in that one case, I feel like and this is kind of getting greedy, I guess, but I feel like the Chargers still lack a downfield element specifically. And Davis, while fast, is still more of like an intermediate / horizontal kind of threat, which is great. Mm-hmm. And, the Chargers will take it. But I would be surprised if he's the guy who, keeps the safeties back. And I think that's what they really could use right now.
Yes, they could. And that's probably something that gets addressed during the offseason. And, he kind of ends up getting signed or drafted over. But I'm just enamored with big playability, especially in these type of formats.
Yeah, he has that for sure.
So it kind of is akin to like Khalif Raymond when he was on the Titans a few years ago. Like, just if your lottery ticket can just cash in one or two like crazy touchdowns, like that's paid itself off and then some. So like I think just Davis having that level of like,
if the Chargers advance, there's a good chance it had something to do with Davis playing slightly better than expected, so it especially if you're talking in the terms of a best ball playoffs draft, then absolutely if you're drafting Justin Herbert, you might want to go looking for Davis just on that basis anyway.
Yeah, and like I'm taking him over like someone that would be your tight end 2, like a Will Dissly or a Stone Smart. Like I'd rather the upside, I think so. But that I think
if you do take Herbert, I think you'll want both of like two of guys like in that category. Whereas if you're looking more so to hedge for the wild card round, and you're like, oh, I need some Charger, but I don't want to go too in on the Chargers because I don't expect them to play very long. Then I think Davis makes sense as kind of like a one-off kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think generally, the way I'm drafting is, and every draft can change your strategy. And again, we'll get into that later. But as it stands, like I'm projecting the Chargers to play in at least 2 games, and I think someone like a Davis at the very end, or I feel like Dobbins is a little bit undervalued in the underdog market. So like just little things to consider. You like having 2 games as opposed to 1. Let's move on over. We got the Steelers and the Ravens on Saturday night. The Ravens, 10-point favorites at BetMGM, 9.5 at DraftKings. I don't know what to make of that number. I mean, I think everyone that's listening to the show knows my proclivities and all that, but I mean, the Ravens just objectively are playing so much better than the Steelers right now, and the Ravens are at home. And I know that people are hesitant about Lamar Jackson in the playoffs, and it's not an easy 1-to-1 parallel that I'm about to draw, but who stunk in the playoffs until he didn't? Peyton Manning. Like,
I mean, pretty much most successful quarterbacks, it's not common to be a Super Bowl winner and at the peak of your career from ages 22 through 26 or whatever point. People were like, if Lamar doesn't do it this year, he sucks. Those people, if Lamar were to win the next 5 Super Bowls, I think those people would still have something to complain about.
Yeah, they'd still like call him, say that he needs to play running back or receiver or something.
He's a Willie Snead merchant, and we're sick of it. We're not falling for it anymore.
Yeah, where's Chris Moore when you need him? But the Steelers,
Seth
they've lost
Roberts. He hasn't done anything since the Ravens lost Seth Roberts, since they'd lost him. Anyway, sorry.
No, those are all good bands. But Steelers, opposite trajectory. They've lost 4 straight going into the postseason. The Ravens have won 4 straight. The Steelers have neither won nor covered since the 2016 season as far as the playoffs are concerned when they made it to the AFC Championship game against the Patriots. Yeah, I just think that the Steelers are out of gas.
They might be, but I think Mike Tomlin is one of those coaches who, and this is a pretty small group of coaches, who, even if his team sucks, when things are reduced to a 1-game timeline, you have to be very concerned. And especially given Pittsburgh's history against the Ravens offense, and it looks like they won't have Zay Flowers, correct? So I don't even think Zay Flowers is that good, but he's clearly the best they have on hand for the roles as they have them. And even though I believe Rashad Bateman can pick up the slack as a intermediate underneath target, it's just the case either way. Like, the Ravens aren't the kind of offense that has so many assets from scrimmage that they can afford to just start chopping off lead contributors. They just don't really have the means to replace it easily. And this is a time where they really could use their customary, means of production. Like, they do have solid basis for believing that they can just kind of take care of this Steelers team. But when you start introducing complications like, but what if there's no Zay Flowers? True, the Ravens still remain the favorite, but it's just a path you don't want to go down against a team like this with the kind of history that the two have. So at the very least, I'm taking the Steelers to cover. I should say I take the Steelers to cover and no more than that. But I'm a little concerned for the Ravens, and I want the Ravens to win. But the Steelers know to win this game against a team like the Ravens, and with a team like the Steelers currently are, they know, Tomlin knows, and he's going to preach, very specific details very directly to his players this week. He will absolutely correctly identify the key details and hammer them all week, and they'll obsess about it all week, and they'll come in, trying to make the game short, trying to create these very specific situations where they know the Ravens aren't as strong as where they are in others, and they try to tee it up and then hammer it. They just hammer that one thing, and it might, in this case, be out of an absence of alternatives. Obviously, the Steelers don't have many ways they can win this game, but if they need to win the game by shortening it and emphasizing things like punching out the ball, then they're going to do it. And as far as the task can be done, they're going to see to it better than anyone. So that's why I worry about the Ravens having like a close call here. But I do think you're right that the Steelers are kind of out of gas on offense, insofar as, while Russell Wilson was clearly a lot better than Kenny Pickett, Trubisky, etc., and I think even Fields, Wilson has been a pretty clear improvement over whatever it is that the Steelers have been doing to make that level of success occur. The premise is kind of wearing thinner. Defenses are maybe adjusting a little bit, because obviously when your only good receiver is George Pickens, there's only so many threats you can pose credibly, and there's only so many ways of trying to fake out the defense that the defense is going to pay attention to, when, especially after the process of elimination, they've determined, like, oh yeah, this is nothing. Like, again, don't just keep the double team on Pickens. Don't fall for any motion or, any tricks that they try to do to get our double team of Pickens dislodged. Just ignore it. You just keep doubling Pickens. You keep making the Steelers dependent on, good as they are as role players, Calvin Austin, Pat Freiermuth are not designed to produce 120 yards per game for you every week. No. And that's kind of the Steelers need Pickens to transcend, or they need guys like that to step up to degrees like that. And it's like, even if guys like Austin and Freiermuth have kind of best case scenarios occur here, it still seems like it's not enough to get the Steelers to a win, especially given that their run game kind of sucks. And they're a run dependent offense going against maybe the best run defense in the NFL.
So I think to unpack the Flowers thing and the sort of parallels that you might be able to draw now between the Ravens pass catching group in the Steelers one. I think it's an interesting one because now Bateman, you could argue, is maybe overexposed as the number one guy in the Baltimore
so
receiving
is Flowers,
core.
I think.
But having the two of them, it made it work, right? Whereas in the Steelers offense, like Pickens isn't overexposed being the number one, but there is not enough around him. And where the Ravens can kind of counter is that they have an advantage at tight end with Mark Andrews as opposed to Pat Freiermuth. I think Isaiah Likely has shown when he's been relied upon a little bit more to be kind of like this dangerous hybrid option that is kind of a unique player, a unique chess piece for Todd Monken. And, whereas like you were saying, the Steelers need to be able to run the ball. They just can't. The Ravens can run the ball when they need to. And Monken's performance against the Chiefs last year, not game planning wise, aside, hopefully having someone like a Derrick Henry and removing Zay Flowers from the offense for at least this week, you can't forget about the run game if you're the Ravens.
Right, and that's one of those key details that Tomlin is going to emphasize. They're going to look at the tape. They're going to look at the plays where Derrick Henry had his big runs over the year. They're going to look at the plays where Henry got stopped in the backfield over the year, and they're going to watch those clips over and over until they decide that they see some takeaway that they can work with for strategizing against the Ravens. And it's probably going to be something like, on these plays here, on this kind of personnel and this kind of downs and distances, they use Henry like this and this because it's worked in these other games. So we need to look for this play. And when you see something like this, you go, 10 out of 10 intensity chasing that read. You assume it's true and you believe it and you go, because we need a splash play. We need to hit Henry in the backfield. We can't let them get second and 5, second and 4. Those kinds of things, if they happen, that's the beginning of the end for us. So we need to hit him at that backfield point. And they're going to try to look at where those plays, timing wise and personnel wise, where they set up for that point of attack to form, and they're just going to hammer it. So I think the Ravens, while the Ravens are built to, and by the point in the game where they kind of gas the defense, they'll overrule the defense in cases like this. They still need to be careful in those situations, because if there's a spot where Henry can go, some narrow part of some play where Henry hinges on a 1 yard gain versus a 6. That's where you have to worry about the Steelers kind of just outperforming expectation. And if the Ravens fall into a lot of 3rd and 9 stuff, obviously against that pass rush, and obviously given the general limitations of the Ravens route runners, that's where things can get dangerous. So I will just say, I think the Ravens can withstand a few drives like that in the first half. If they have to go 3 and out a handful of times, it's like, fine, just don't turn it over and don't take negative. It has to be a war of attrition. Obviously, the Steelers can only do so much in a case like that too. It's not as if they have a better group of, a better means of at their disposal of gassing the Ravens defense. It's not the case. It's like the Steelers, no matter what, need the Ravens to make mistakes that they don't normally, to create benefits that the Steelers can't normally create for themselves.
Yep. And I think, to your point on the tape study on the Ravens and what the Steelers can do to exploit it, I think if there is like a sort of potential Achilles heel for this Ravens team, it's its interior offensive line, the guards in particular. Faele is someone that if you can do things to kind of attack him, like, disguised blitzes where he's sort of, it's not so obvious to him where he needs to go to just, use his mammoth frame to block guys, he totally whiffs assignments. So, Cam Hayward and company, and maybe some inside linebacker blitzes from Patrick.
They got to watch out for those batted passes. That's something they really got to watch out for. If the Ravens, if Hayward's batting passes at the line of scrimmage, that's exactly the way it goes from what should be like a 7 easy yard catch to a turnover where the Steelers all of a sudden have the ball at the Ravens like 38. That's the kind of stuff the Steelers are good at.
It is, and that's why I understand your hesitance to take the Ravens and the points, because the Steelers are obviously capable. Yeah,
just the points. It would be a pretty big disaster if the Ravens managed to blow it. It's possible, but it would be pretty crazy.
I will say that I'm going to take the Ravens to cover here. I think
Fair
the
enough.
line is set where it because you can see it running away potentially on the other side for the Steelers, where they get down, their offense just can't really catch up. And then when the Ravens offense is clicking, I'm not really sure that there's any defense that can like fully stop them. And then the onslaught is on. So that's more so what I'm expecting in this game. But I think you bring some like really, legitimate concerns as to why the Ravens
and John,
can't take this lightly.
Those points that I mentioned, Tomlin hammering, these particular stops at these particular points of development on these run plays, these particular play designs where the ball goes these particular places. If the Steelers whiff on these things, they go in knowing they're all in on it. They know they're going all or nothing on these very small things. If these things start missing, if Lamar's completing easy passes over the middle, if Hayward's jumping and missing, if those things start early to go toward the Ravens' favor, I think you're right. Then the Steelers are at risk of getting kind of washed away because they at once are capable of setting up and exploiting these opportunities, but they do so from a disadvantageous position. Like they're just toast if they can't make these somewhat long shot events occur, whereas the Ravens are built to win with like a mid-range outcome.
Yep, I think so as well. So well said. I think that covers it for this game. Before we get on to the Sunday action, we got a message from our pal Nick Whalen. He's going to tell you some stuff about DraftKings Pick 6.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick 6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick 6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick 6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-78-89-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
And look at that. We are back in business here. Sunday, kicking us off at 1 o'clock Eastern is Bills Broncos from Orchard Park. We've got another game with a pretty large spread, you could say. We've got the Bills 9-point favorites at BetMGM against the Broncos. It's Bo Nix's first start in the playoffs. I think the Bills, I have a hard time thinking that like you can squint and see if variance plays enough of a factor for the Broncos, and Bo Nix plays a really good game to where the Broncos can keep this close. But I think like 9 times out of 10, like the Bills win this one and cover. So I'm on the Bills here. I think that this has been a pretty terrific season for Buffalo. It's obviously not a hot take, but like I'd be legitimately stunned if their season ended here.
Right. Yeah. I think basically the problem for the Broncos here is that even if Bo Nix plays a pretty good game, and by the way, it seems like we can just go ahead and assume the running game won't really do anything. So we need Bo Nix to kind of do whatever it does take for the Broncos to win as an offense. And Nix can do more or less whatever that is. And no matter what Nix does, it seems like Allen should be able to answer with, excess. And I think the way the Broncos play defense, it's an unfortunate kind of it's an unfortunate incidental detail here that they go against Josh Allen, who with the Broncos running so much man coverage and being so good at it, they have this unfortunate situation where like they're a good defense and they're maybe the best in the entire league at playing man coverage from the cornerback position. But if you play press man coverage against Josh Allen, you're just going to have him run for 100 yards on you. And it doesn't even really matter if your corners are absolutely flawless at noticing, like, oh wait, the quarterback's running. Like, even if they turn and give great run support, it's kind of too late at that point. So there is a possibility, I think, of the Broncos kind of making it a close game for a while, but at some point they're just going to kind of run out of ammo, I think, whereas the Bills are kind of well prepared to just sit back and just keep shooting back however many times it takes. And if Bo Nix has a good game here, it makes that much more likely that Allen has a big game, and it seems like the Bills, I think, will just be able to, like I said, however many punches the Broncos throw, the Bills just throw one more and on to the next week pretty much.
So looking at the old forecast, and not to say that the Broncos would be intimidated by precip or by
they should be.
Cold
Bo
weather.
Nix is not really he's not an AFC North kind of quarterback, let's say. AFC East, as it were.
He's like an Oakley, like really fancy ski gear for his first time skiing type of guy. But really what I wanted to say was what I would give to, like, just as a neutral observer, be up at a parking lot in Orchard Park at like 9 a.m. on Saturday, or Sunday, to see that. Oh, they might get started on Saturday as far as the tailgating goes, but one of these days I dream of going to Buffalo for one of those and just seeing the insanity, especially
that stuff has to get
weather.
Out of hand at some point, right? Like, it has to turn into a getting out of hand version of itself where people are just wearing garbage cans and fighting each other.
Well, if you're the Broncos,
Kenny Rogers,
you just hope,
jackass.
Yeah, like you just hope that if you're a Broncos fan, that at least some of the guys wearing the barrels show up and try to.
I hope they don't.
A little bit.
I hope the FBI, like, unlike the Juggalos, I hope the FBI doesn't need to put like Bills Nation on like a terrorist group list because of they're mobilizing in large, violent numbers in parking lots across Upper New York.
Whoop whoop. Okay, wow, that was a ICP reference I was not expecting to make on this podcast, but since we made it, I think that shows that we
settled
properly
the question of this game. Yeah,
we have. Before we get on to Packers Eagles, we do have a message from our friends over at LIV Golf. A new season of LIV Golf Fantasy is coming in 2025. New prizes, new ways to win, and more are coming in the new season. Get ready to play and sign up now at fantasy.livgolf.com. We also got a message from our friends over at Blue Wire. All right, Packers Eagles. Jalen Hurts, good to go from all accounts. Returned to practice on Wednesday after being in concussion protocol for the last little while. Eagles 4.5-point favorites. The Packers confuse me because I think at times that they look like a team that could legitimately like push for the NFC Championship, and other times they look pretty far from that. And I think the Eagles have been a lot more consistent over the course of the season. They've, my concerns about the Eagles are more like what happens if they have to play catch up, or like what if Nick Sirianni has to make a big decision, but like they just are built in such a way and play in such a way where like those questions don't get posed very often. And I'm not sure that the Packers make them answer those questions here either.
Yeah, the Packers, I think, pretty obviously do not have as much talent as the Eagles do. And I don't want to make myself sound like a Jordan Love skeptic exactly, but I think I am already somehow at the point where I'm a little lower on him than most people, just in that I still see him talked about as one of the better quarterbacks in the league. And he definitely makes some of the best plays at quarterback, but his low points and the kind of like play-to-play consistency just need to improve with Jordan Love, because things go needlessly cold, get needlessly complicated for really prohibitively long stretches of time, and the Packers get into these holes in games. And I think that's part of why there's this kind of there's this slight disconnect between how good the Packers seem to be at all these important things, especially on offense, and how they seem to just kind of not get the results you would expect for periods of time longer than you would guess. And that's just kind of what losing looks like. And I wouldn't call it underachieving exactly. It's just kind of like I do think Matt LaFleur gets that offense to overachieve. And I think the defense has done a pretty good job under Hafley, that defensive coordinator. He's clearly not a Barry or Pettin type. So the defense for the Packers, I will say, I think it's clearly better than it's been in some number of years. So that certainly helps them. And on offense, there's all over the field, there's these statements you can make about the things they could be able to do. And I think they absolutely should do those things against the Eagles. But the Eagles are a defense too good to play poorly against. Like you need to show up, and the Packers offense has just, again, had so many prolonged periods of going cold this year. And a lot of it looks to me like Jordan Love, I don't know if it's hesitating on easy open throws, if maybe he's holding out for shots downfield too much. Obviously it's often a benefit with Love, how good he is, how good he is at extending plays, because he's so indifferent to the pass rush. Like he just doesn't care that it's there, and he's always willing to maneuver in the pocket while keeping his eyes downfield. But so many times, even when he, through prolonging the play, gets these openings, Jordan Love throws these knuckleballs sometimes that are just so inaccurate. His accuracy really has to be among the worst for starting quarterbacks, which, even if everything else is great, and generally everything else is, like his general sensibility is very good. The question of like who can make the best throws, it's like Jordan Love is always on that list of best throws of the year. It's just the in-between parts I think need to improve, and maybe they will. I mean, he's still a recent starter, still a generally young quarterback, and the narrative can change quickly with just a few good games, and certainly a good game in this setting would do a lot to reset the narrative on Love. But right now, I think it's just one of those things, like we need to see Love play better than he has in months, just to hold serve against the Eagles, like just to tread water. And the Eagles, especially with that kind of with the Eagles being in the position here where they can just point blank shut down the run on defense, and then threaten on offense on the ground as much or more than any other team. That's one of those givens that's tough to account for as the opposing team, as a visiting underdog. So I'll take the Eagles to win. If Love has one of his better games, though, then that puts the Eagles in a really dangerous spot, because I don't think Jalen Hurts can comfortably throw 30-plus passes in a game like this. I think one of the keys on offense for the Eagles is that even if the Packers are kind of containing Saquon early, the Eagles have to avoid that bait. Don't go opening up the offense and throwing the ball and abandoning the run, because that's how you voluntarily remove Barkley from the equation, A, and B, it's how you make Hurts look like the worst version of himself. And if they do that, then the Packers definitely could beat them. I just think if the Eagles stay cool, they should be able to take care of it.
And the Eagles have been great at that this year, to their credit.
Yeah.
Like they've had lots of kind of not necessarily sloppy, but slow starts. Where they're going into halftime having scored only 10 points, but then you look at the final score and they're scored in the 30s. So a lot of the times, like they sort of just like all the body blows that they throw in the first half that don't really register to the naked eye, they start becoming haymakers in the second half, and that's when they kind of start to look
a
like
step
one of the
too
most
late
dangerous
against Barkley is a touchdown. So
it is. One more great dialogue on Jordan Love there, and I do think that the highs are high, the lows are low. We've established that. How big of a loss is Christian Watson in your mind to this group of receivers that's across the board good, but not a ton of star power necessarily? Not that Watson's a star, but he can do some stuff.
Yeah, I think Watson's a totally good, close even to ideal 30, 35 snap kind of receiver. I think he can be a passable starter, certainly, but he does have limitations. He does have extreme strengths too. It's just that, to me, a player with some extreme weaknesses and extreme strengths is best as a wide receiver 3 rather than a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 1 or whatever. So I don't see Watson as anything close to the wide receiver 1 for the Packers. I still think it's Jaden Reed, and I think to a close, lesser extent, it's Romeo Doubs. Watson's function to me is more about setting the spatial dimensions of the field, because with his reach, with his speed, the defense always has to know where he is, or they just kind of give up a touchdown. Those are just the terms. And when the Packers don't have Watson, it's like Dobbs is still pretty fast, and Dobbs can definitely make a defense pay if they don't keep an eye on him over on the boundary. But he isn't just outrunning everybody. He isn't just taking a pass and running away from everybody with it. So it hurts the Packers. But I guess the one thing I'd say about this one game is I don't know if Watson's presence has a decoy utility against Vic Fangio's defense, because they kind of just do a cover 2 thing most of the time anyway. So if Watson is running against a cover 2 defense, like they're just running the cover 2 either way, like one of the 2 safeties will follow him. And I guess on that half of the field, you could dictate a little bit of an opening, but it would be a brief thing. And they have Mitchell, Slay, DeJean at corner. So those corners don't really need that much help in the first place. But obviously without Watson, the Packers just categorically cannot strike 40 plus yards downfield as much as they would otherwise. Like Wicks is not running those routes. Dobbs, again, if I had to guess, Dobbs is probably like a 4.48, 4.46 40 kind of guy, but Watson being a 4.34 is obviously a totally different game when he's on the field.
No, exactly. So the field kind of gets a little bit shrunk on the Packers.
Which you don't want with those defensive tackles that the Eagles have. And if you can't run as the Packers, then you're really in a lot of trouble, and they might not be able to run here.
Yeah, I think that's a problem. And I think there's, again, this is anecdotal, but I was doing a playoff best ball draft on Underdog earlier today, for research purposes.
Yeah.
Did notice that Jacobs, like no one wanted to touch him with a 10-foot pole because I think people expect the Packers to lose, and B, they don't expect him to do much of anything here. So an interesting sort of variance pick, I suppose. But
I wouldn't count the Packers out. I know I expressed a lot of doom scenarios for them, but I think
you did.
There's also the doom scenario for the Eagles. Again, if they actually have to throw the ball 30 plus times, if really good version of Jordan Love shows up, that's a big problem for the Eagles. It's just, I think anything less than that for the Packers, then Jacobs probably can't run, and then everything kind of leads to more bad outcomes. But if the Packers do advance, then I think Jacobs could have a big second game, and if good Love shows up, I think Jacobs could have a good game here. It's just Jacobs can't create the space on his own here.
No. So, but the factor that moves the direction of this game is which version of Jordan Love shows up. Let's go to the Sunday nighter. We got Commanders Bucks. We got the Bucks 3-point favorites. The reigning 2-time NFC South champion, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. How about that? Tom Brady retires and they get better. Pretty amazing. I don't know. I just had to fit in a pot shot.
They had to go down a harrowing path, defeating the best of the best, but here they are standing still.
Sometimes you have to go back to go forward, but so the Bucks 3-point favorites here against the Commanders. This will obviously be Jaden Daniels' first postseason start on the road. Interestingly, this is where the season started for these teams back in week 1 in Tampa. Things Washington has far exceeded expectations this season generally, and certainly since that game in week 1, totally different team. I think they've totally reframed everyone's expectations. But what do you make of this matchup here? I tend to think that the Bucks will face kind of little resistance when they have the ball. These are two teams that rank, I think, inside the top 5, if not the top 10 in time of possession this year. So they're both teams that are really relying on keeping the other defense on the field and just kind of wearing them down, sustaining long drives, that type of thing. But I don't know. I know the Bucks kind of effed around with the Saints last week and almost blew it. And the Commanders, Jaden Daniels being out for a lot of that game against the Cowboys made things a little bit dicey for them as well. But I think the Bucks are the side in this one.
Yeah, it certainly seems safe to say that the Buccaneers have the better run defense here. I do think the Washington pass rush and pass defense is better than the Tampa Bay side, though. So what I think that amounts to is basically both offenses are situated well enough. I do think there's more danger on the Washington offense on their side because, in my opinion, if the run game is dead, then everything else can kind of get sketchy. And I think even if Washington just has to throw the ball more than they'd like to because the Buccaneers are stopping the run more than Washington expected, that's a way too for things to kind of just get a little bit off schedule, I think. Whereas the Buccaneers, as much as I have concerns about Bucky Irving's ability to hold up over a course of a year with the kind of workload they've been giving him lately, one game I don't, and the Commanders have allowed 4.9 yards per carry to running backs this year, which is really brutal mark. There's a handful of teams lately just that have run defenses that look like they belong in the Sun Belt or something. It's really crazy. I don't know who's allowing this. This is not good football. But 4.9 yards per carry. I can imagine Bucky Irving too on some of these lateral runs getting Bobby Wagner in his skis, tripping over, going left or right. So the Buccaneers can kind of, I think with that being the case, the Buccaneers can kind of play not that great on offense and still move the ball pretty well. And certainly but just the same, like they need the run game to show up because Marshawn Lattimore is probably playing in this one. And I do think that if you put Lattimore on the field, the Washington defense goes from kind of not that great to pretty good, which I know that sounds kind of lukewarm either way, but it's the distinction of the two that's important here because it's Lattimore he takes their biggest weakness and turns it into pretty close to his strength. So Lattimore also, I guess, not to bury the lead, I assume he's going to follow around Mike. So Mike Evans is going to get thrown out of the game. He's going to have 0 catches. So the Buccaneers do need their run game to show up. To be serious, I don't think that's going to happen to Evans, but it cannot be good for Evans's projection that Lattimore is in this game. It just can't be.
No, either getting in his head or the actual like on field like ability to kind of be the kryptonite to what Evans can really do out there. So I think when Chris Godwin went out for the season, you kind of thought this is a real trouble spot for the Bucs, but we've talked about it a lot over the course of the season. Liam Cohen being really, kind of pragmatic and using the ingredients that he has around him as best as he can. And I think, we talked about it all the way back during draft season. Like Jalen McMillan is like one of the finds of the draft as far as the receivers go.
Yeah, he has had some really easy matchups lately, and I don't take it for a given that he shows up here, but it's not because it wouldn't be because I'm like saying he's fake or anything. It's just it's hard to have he's got to have touchdowns in like 5 straight games or something. So it's hard to do that
Saints,
forever.
Panthers, those types of things. So.
You can be a good player and you'll still not do that forever, of course. So that's why I do think it kind of I think the Buccaneers need at least one running back to be productive here. I like their chances of making exactly that happen. And so I think as long as it does, the rest should kind of work itself out more or less.
So we've dug in on what this game should look like or what to focus on when the Bucs have the ball. But, how do you anticipate this Washington offense functioning against Tampa's defense that, has some great pieces, but a lot of injuries, a lot of question marks.
Yeah, I mean, the Buccaneers defense had the Washington offense in hell the first time these teams played. But the one thing is, I don't know how much that Washington offense is still the way they function generally now. At the very least, we have Olamide Zaccheaus in the slot instead of Luke McCaffrey. Granted, they don't have Noah Brown. I don't think they did in that game either. I think he might have been hurt, whatever. The Buccaneers are probably not going to get as good of a result on defense in this game as they did the first time around. So I guess the question might be, how much better of a game does Jaden Daniels have, and how much more, or does he get more help from the running backs in this game than he got last time? And what would come out of either of those possibilities? I don't really know. I guess I personally have trouble. I'm a bit of a Brian Robinson hater, so I don't exactly look to him to transcend a situation that's otherwise challenging. And I think this Buccaneers defensive, as long as Vita Vea is out there, they're probably pretty good at defending the run. Like that's why you draft Vita Vea. He's a run defense in himself, pretty much.
Yeah.
So Daniels needs to have a bigger game than last time, and last time was a disaster. Like that was the nightmare scenario, very specifically for Daniels and this Washington offense. Is like the Buccaneers kept a safety over McLaurin the whole game, so McLaurin couldn't get that fly route shot that him and Daniels are otherwise so great at. And with that play being absent, they had no second move the whole game. They just had nothing else. So Zacchaeus, I think, can be a new element that they didn't have the first time. And there might even be something there as far as like maybe Zacchaeus can do some kind of damage that creates an opening for McLaurin that wasn't there the last time. But that's the kind of stuff Washington needs to have turn to their favor. Like they need the answers to those questions to be like, yes, it did open up something for McLaurin that wasn't there last time. Because if they just repeat the same conditions, it's clearly to the benefit of the Buccaneers.
I think my favorite lean from this game is the under 50.5. I'm not as confident in taking a side as far as the spread goes. I do think the Bucs ultimately get it done though in advance, but I can't quite confidently say that, they make it look easy. I do have some respect for how this Washington team has played this year. Let's run through this last game, hit some best ball stuff, and get on with it. So we got the Vikings and the Rams rounding out the slate Monday night, 8:00 Eastern. We got the Vikings 1.5 point favorites here in this spot. And they, I thought you brought up a great point on Sunday during the Vikings-Lions game where Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator for the Lions, he's been having to figure stuff out with a defense where, their pets' heads are falling off. Like it's been a brutal season of attrition for that defense. And whereas most defensive coordinators in that particular setup would play more vanilla and more conservative, they just went right after Sam Darnold. Went right after him, and they had Darnold seeing ghosts all Sunday night. And I think that whereas the Vikings aren't nearly as like fake as they were 2 years ago when they had all those 1-score victories and everything, I still think there is a need for Darnold to prove that he can win in adverse conditions. And now obviously Kevin O'Connell, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison can kind of help, grease the skids and make things easier for Darnold. But, we saw the Rams put up a good fight against the Vikings earlier this season. What happens here?
Well, Darnold, I don't know if he had the yips last week as much as he was just that actually confused. I think, excuse me, I think it's more the second thing because the Glenn defense was just throwing off the timing so much that, with the offense, the way these plays go, it's like it's the quarterback, you're dropping back, you're waiting on certain cues to determine your certain reads. And when you're all off rhythm and when Glenn's throwing in these curveballs at him, Darnold, I think, just got confused, which is realistically his limitation as a quarterback. I mean, even this year with his bounce back, with this, breakout season, Darnold still turned the ball over a lot. It always was clear that the Vikings, while they got good enough production out of Darnold, it was an overachievement. Like it's not because it was easy to do or something that just needed to happen. It was like they needed to. It was basically an exceptional outcome, and of course, like you said, it's dependent on the receivers too. But Darnold will always need some amount of sheltering, and the more the Vikings need him to come out and carry them, the more trouble they're in. So if the Vikings defense can't show up here, then Darnold's in trouble. Like Darnold needs the situation to be favorable. He might have some ability to shoot it out a little bit, but you, as the Vikings, don't want to end up there. You want to maintain the position of advantage throughout the game. So while on the one hand, I think the Rams offense doesn't project that well against the Vikings defense, I think some of the tendencies of the Rams offense in terms of spacing and the kind of plays that they run, I think that actually plays into the tendencies of the Vikings, because the Vikings, they have corners. They're doing a money ball thing at corner with guys who basically cannot turn and run downfield. And not to say Nakua, especially, not to say the Rams don't have a downfield threat. Like Atwell can do it. Nakua can do it sometimes. But even Nakua, when he makes his plays downfield, I think it's usually there's an element of surprise there. Like even if you would call it more Nakua's accomplishment for having a great
head fake and a route or something like that. It's like he still can't really outrun that many corners. And going against a guy like Stephon Gilmore, like clearly you stay more in his element the closer to the line of scrimmage you are. If you're trying to run like at the sticks all your routes, Gilmore's ready to just play, physical the whole way up there. But if you can make Gilmore run 20 yards downfield and have turn, flip his hips, put his back to the quarterback, that's when Gilmore gets really uncomfortable. And yet it's not a situation that the Rams create very often. So Nakua, Kupp, Stafford, of course, these guys are prepared to grind it out in close quarters. Like they don't need a wide open field, but it's a lot easier when the field is wide open. And I think it's instead going to be kind of like a hard hitting, grinding, kind of painful sort of effort at best for the Rams offense.
So this is the game on this particular slate that I'm most confident that no matter which side I pick, I'm going to look stupid.
They're pretty equal teams, I think. I mean, the Rams defense has some guys in the front seven who, if they get going, then Darnold, maybe he gets all goofy like last time. So that's one way the Vikings could fall apart. But if the Rams don't get to Darnold and Darnold kind of turns into, the first 16 games, then the Rams are in trouble because they can't cover those receivers. So it's, I think it, in a lot of ways comes down to the Rams defense because even if the Rams offense has a good game, the Vikings should be able to score points unless the Rams defense can make Darnold look like he did last week, which, go ahead, flip a coin. I don't have any idea which one is more likely than the other, but I think that's what the Rams need.
Right. And, you got Fisk and Verse, coming at you. So it's a dangerous spot. I mean, I think that there's a reason why that this game has the most narrow spread of any game on the board this weekend. It really can go either way. And to kind of fully flesh out how dumb I'm going to feel, like if I pick the Vikings and Darnold looks like he did a week ago, then, I'm going to feel foolish for having trusted. And then on the other side, if the Vikings look like they did the first 16 games of the season, then I'm going to be like, why did I just way overcorrect for the Vikings getting, kind of punked against the Lions in Detroit, Sunday Night Football, 1 seed on the line? Like, you can't really fault them for not getting it done in that spot. So this one is really tricky for me to figure out. I'm gonna lean Rams, home, Stafford, playoff experience, but either way, I feel oogie about it. But regardless, really excited for this matchup. Let's round things out, Mario, unless you had anything else to add for this game.
No.
All right. So playoff best ball. What the heck is it?
Well, there's probably various versions you can find throughout the internet or whatever, but on Underdog, which is the only place I've had the chance to look at to this point, they have this best ball playoff tournament format, I should say. There might be non-tournament versions or at least lesser, higher odds of payout kind of contests. I'm not sure. But otherwise, you generally got variation. You got variations of this tournament of whatever, like 3, 5, 25, however many dollars. And the deal more or less is that to cash in that contest, you need to walk this very narrow tightrope that's swinging over a cliff, like one of those bad bridges, one of those bad rope bridges. Like you got to cross that to get through each of the playoff rounds, advancing by virtue of having a high score for your league in each week, while not using up all of your ammo too early or too much in the middle or whatever, so that you can also advance each week and get to the Super Bowl round where you also have one of the highest ranking scores. Like that's where the winner is determined in the Super Bowl round. So in the Underdog tournaments, if you don't have players who are playing in the Super Bowl, maybe your team can advance to the Super Bowl round, but you won't cash in it. And so you'd get some sort of whatever lesser payout as a result. And, different people have different goals, I guess, for a contest like this. And so it's not so much that there's one or two right ways to do it as much as there's more a given strategy you'd want to adapt for whatever your means, whatever your goals are. But this is an extremely long shot kind of contest to win at the end. And so it's not necessarily the right way to look at it to go like trying to draft the best player available or whatever. It's more like for your team to advance, for it to walk this narrow rope successfully, you need to commit fully to kind of extreme premises, right? Like you need to, the team, realistically, you got to stack ideally with both teams that make the Super Bowl. But because one of those teams or both could be teams with week one, wild card round buys, you also need to make sure, absolutely sure, you have a top, like I believe you need to finish in the top 2 of your 6-team league to advance to the divisional round. So you need in this wild card round to have a score that's in the top 2, or else you could have the highest scoring Super Bowl round of your group and it won't count because you're disqualified by then. So that's what I mean by being such a winding, shaking tightrope is unlikely things will happen, and it's not so much that you can try successfully to anticipate them as much as just kind of cover your bases over realistically multiple lineups. So if the draft pick that you're given doesn't have Josh Allen fall to it, you're probably just going to have to resign to not having many Bills on that team. If you're adding any, it's not ideal to make an all-in stack on a team without the quarterback in question, I guess I could mention, especially with Allen's case. But it's like if similarly, if you've drafted a few teams already in whatever, the 4th one, you've yet to draft any Packers, in that case, it's like, well, maybe for you in this situation, it makes sense to have a Packers lineup in this case, make the Packers one of the 2.5, 3 teams that comprise your lineup, because you've covered your bases, those other bases previously with those other stacks you've built. And so, I mean, especially given, the Packers being a wild card round team, some wild card round team, I guess, an example of a kind of stacking logic you could pursue is like you look at some team in the wild card round and you sort of just ask the question, well, what if they made the Super Bowl? And you build your team as if the answer is, well, they did. And you build the team that way. And yeah, maybe it takes a lot of things that you don't expect to happen, but unexpected things do happen generally. And maybe it'll work out, but you're not going to be able to advance each round and also have a Super Bowl competitive lineup without kind of, like I said, like committing to a scenario where you at once advance, but also have enough guys playing when those final 2 teams are up that you finish high in that round. So it's why there's no right or wrong answer, really. It's more about like how much you commit to the approach you take.
So I think that, based on the guidelines you kind of drew up there and my own experience, like it feels like you want the primo teams that are also playing this weekend. I think is sort of but that's going to be the conventional wisdom that you're up against for every draft. So like the Ravens, the Bills, the Eagles, like those guys, those are going to be really, coveted assets in these particular formats. So what I think an important thing to do is cover your bases with one of those teams as best as you can, draft board, draft order permitting, and then try to just target some teams and some players from said teams that you could envision at least playing in 2 games. So for me, this morning in that test run, I actually took Lamar Jackson first overall, and I grabbed Justin Jefferson second. So I know that flies in the face of what I was just saying for the Vikings-Rams game, but for the purpose of this particular exercise,
I think it makes you a week 1 favorite, and if the Ravens advance, then it quickly becomes your odds for the later rounds also improve.
Yeah, and I backed it up with Andrews in the 3rd round and Rashad Bateman a little bit later on. I got Sam Darnold.
I think with Lamar, a guy like him, when it's like a blue chip quarterback who's playing in the wild card round and has a somewhat realistic chance of making the Super Bowl, then you only need to pick 1 quarterback. Like you don't need to. You would only need 2 if you were, I guess, if one of them was like Patrick Mahomes or whatever the NFC one is.
But that's a good detail. Maybe I shouldn't have taken that Sam Darnold pick in the 9th round in that case, but
no, not that you need. Again, nothing mandatory, everything permissible. If Darnold has a good game, you won't regret it, especially if Lamar has a bad one. But it's just to say, it's like it might seem like extreme, some of the things you could consider with a contest like this, but basically nothing is. The only thing that would be extreme is picking backups or something, picking a team that's intentionally bad. That would be extreme. That's trying too hard to think outside of the box, I think.
Yeah, you can't do that. Keep it within reason, but I think just try to
pick Simi Fehoko, in my opinion, for instance.
Yeah, so just like come up when you're entering your draft and like you make your first pick or two, just base the rest of your picks off of that, and kind of craft a narrative in your head. Like, oh, okay, well, I ended up with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Like, I guess I'm going to be in on the Vikings for this particular team. And then you want to, kind of have a dance partner in the AFC side of the bracket, where theoretically, they're also making a deep playoff run. And then last comment, I do feel like, sorry. That's my alarm that I'm about to go on the radio. Alarm. It is. But Isaiah Pacheco, I feel like an underdog is cheap, and I feel like the Chiefs are going to play at least 2 games. I got him in the 7th. I don't know. Think about it. But that's anecdotal, and that's it. But I think you laid out a good kind of breakdown for how to approach these best ball tournaments for the NFL playoffs. Just yeah, I'm excited. I feel like I'm going to waste a good amount of time tomorrow while it snows in Atlanta doing a bunch of these drafts, because everyone's going to be freaking out, and there's no way I'm getting on the road in those circumstances. That's going to do it for us here on this edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, the Wild Card edition. Big thanks to our sponsors over at Blue Wire, over at LIV Golf, over at DraftKings Pick 6 for Mario Puig. I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.